Om Sahana Bhutu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayet. Good. Welcome back. In the last class, we had begun a new chapter, a portion of the Aranya Parva, where we see in the forest, we see Draupadi and Yuddhishthira engaged in a very heated conversation. It is, and you'll see that as our class continues today. Draupadi is extremely angry. A little louder. Thank you. Draupadi is extremely angry. After all, she's just been kicked out of her comfortable palace with her husbands, and now they're, instead of all the comfortable situation and fine clothes, are living in the forest wearing tree bark. Rather a sudden and dramatic change of lifestyle. Also, just to make a connection to our, many of you were in our meditation session, we talked about repressed hurt. Is it possible that Draupadi might have had some repressed anger and hurt from how she was treated back at the palace as a result of the dice game, the way she was abused by Dushasana? I don't want to tell you the whole story. So it's possible that she bore in her heart a lot of repressed hurt and anger from past events, and now in the forest, it's bubbling up, to make a connection to our meditation session. And as it bubbles up, she's letting Yuddhishthira have it. And she's expressing, of course she has a right to do so, and Yuddhishthira, as husband, he better be ready for that. That's the way life works. Now, before we proceed, there was a nice question that came. In our before the question, just to summarize one of the points of the last class, we discussed how the origin of anger was a very important point. The origin of anger, ultimately, if you are a mature person, especially if you're a Vedantin, you have to say that the origin of anger is within us. We have to give up blaming the person or situation for our anger, and let's just be very pragmatic about it. How is it that two people can be in the same situation, and one will get angry and another won't? Think about being in a long queue, right? Some people in that long queue will get really angry and irritated and frustrated, and the other people will think, what's your problem? We're just waiting in line. So notice both of those groups of people are in identical situations. Some respond with anger and irritation, and the others are fine. Isn't that evidence that the real source of anger and irritation is within? And we discussed that at some length. And we also discussed how for Draupadi then, one solution to her anger would be understanding. Like, for example, when you're standing in line, if you understand the inevitability of standing in lines, if you just accept that as an inevitable part of life, then you're okay with it. In the same way, if she could understand the inevitability of Duryodhana's behavior, if she could understand that it is absolutely a given that Duryodhana was going to behave in that manner and leading to their exile in the forest, if she could understand the inevitability of Duryodhana's behavior, then she could set aside her anger. Now, in response to that, the question came, you said it is in Duryodhana's nature to be Duratma, an evil-hearted person, Duratma. And there's nothing Draupadi can do about it. This perspective will indeed help Draupadi to deal with her anger. But how does it help Duryodhana? doesn't. If everyone thinks that it is their nature to do whatever they're doing, then how can we change and grow spiritually? That's a good comment. So, notice I suggested for Draupadi, if she could understand the inevitability of Duryodhana's behavior, then she could let go of some of her anger. So now let's shift to Duryodhana's perspective. Suppose Duryodhana has it in his mind, it's inevitable I'm going to behave like this. That's not helpful, right? It's not helpful at all. And it's not completely true either, because while it is true that Duryodhana's nature is to be duratma, to be evil-hearted, it's also true that Duryodhana has the capacity to change. Both are true. Duryodhana has the very nasty personality that he has, but it's equally true that he has the capacity to change. Of course, the third factor is he doesn't have the will to change because of his wrong thinking and ignorance. So it is not true that we are the way we are and there's nothing we can do about it. That was not the point I was making in the prior class. The point is that Duryodhana is the way he is for 1,000 reasons that Draupadi can't do anything about. Yuddhishthira can't do anything about. The only person who could change Duryodhana's behavior is Duryodhana, when and if he's ready to do so. And it doesn't look like he is going to be ready anytime in the whole course of the story of the Mahabharata. Okay, so that was the nice question. And with that, we can return to our verses. We had seen the first few verses of chapter 28. We'll continue here. This is verse 13. Now, Draupadi continues to express her anger to Yuddhishthira. Yatvaham chandana digdham, yatvaham chandana apashyam sarva varchasam, apashyam surya varchasam, satva pankamala digdham, satva pankamala Drishtva muhyami bharata, drishtva muhyami bharata. So Draupadi says, Ya tva aham apashyam. I saw what? Tvam, you. I saw you, Yuddhishthira. Chandana digdham, anointed with chandana, anointed with sandalwood. So this is, I suppose, in ancient times when you were really finely dressed. You weren't completely dressed until you applied chandana. It wasn't only applied as tilakam, it was also applied, I suppose, as a perfume. So if you were dressed very elegantly, you were perfumed with sandalwood. Chandana digdham. And she said, I saw you previously at the palace. You were Surya Varchasam. You were shining like the sun. You had the brilliance of the sun as you were anointed with sandalwood. But now, Satva Pankamala Digdham. Adigdham. Yeah, Chandana Adigdham. Pankamala adigdam. Adigdam, anointed. Stained, and here, stained. Now I see you, pankamala. The mala, the dirt of panka, of mud. Now I see you stained with mud. Previously, I saw you in a palace, anointed, perfumed with sandalwood, shining like the sun. Now I see you here in a forest, stinking with mud. How's that? Because sandalwood is fragrant. Mud, I suppose, is fragrant in a negative sense. So before you were perfumed with sandalwood, now you're stinking with mud. And she says, Drishtva, seeing this, Mukhyami Bharata, O Yuddhishthira, Mukhyami, I'm devastated. I'm overcome with my anger, seeing you like this. Now, you might think, well, naturally, I mean, it's her husband, and to see her husband who used to have such a nice life, and now to see him stinking with mud, isn't it natural she is going to be angry? You can call it natural, but natural is not desirable. Natural means we can do better. And this word natural bothers me a little bit, so give me just a moment. Some of you remember how I've explained this before. It is natural that infants don't know how to use a bathroom. Naturally. Certainly isn't desirable. So that which is natural is not necessarily desirable. So, you could say Draupadi's anger is natural, but it's natural in the same way as an infant who is not bathroom trained. It is natural but undesirable. Now, earlier we said that the true source of anger comes from within. How is this coming from Draupadi and not from this situation? Draupadi has an expectation. My husband should definitely be in a palace, dressed in fine clothes and anointed with sandalwood. He should not be standing here in this forest clothed in deer bark and stinking of mud. She has an expectation which is a false expectation. Further, so that's one way of understanding it, understanding that the source of anger comes from within Draupadi. One issue is her false expectation. We discussed it at some length in the prior class. We expect things to be our way. We expect things to be different than what they are. You expect that you shouldn't have to stand in that queue for 20 minutes. Isn't it interesting? That one expectation, I shouldn't have to do this. Isn't that what converts an ordinary situation into an aggravating situation? That conclusion, that expectation, I shouldn't have to stand in this queue for 20 minutes. False expectation. Second issue is Draupadi's attachment to her husband. My husband is stinking of mud. Notice in the prior chapter we saw they met the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas who lived in that forest. Did Draupadi complain about how the Brahmanas were stinking of mud? She didn't say anything about the Brahmanas. But when her husband stinks of, my husband is stinking of mud, that's where the problem comes in. I'm just illustrating how the root of the problem is not the situation, nor is it Duryodhana. The root of the problem of anger. The root of the problem of anger is within. She continues to complain. She's got a lot of complaining to do here. Sarvan sthanadya pashyami. Sarvan sthanadya vane vanyena jivitaha. Vane vanyena aduhkarhan manushyendra. Aduhkarhan manushyendra. No pashamyati me manaha, no pashamyati me. Adya, today, now, sarvantan, all of you, referring to the 5 Pandavas, her 5 husbands, all of you, pashyami, I see you here. Here where? Vane, I see you here in the forest. And what are you doing here in the forest? Vanyena jivitaha. You're living on the products of the forest. You're living on fruits and roots and so forth, which is very demeaning to this family that has lived in a palace. And he says, Aduhkarhan, all of you do not deserve this kind of miserable life. Manushyendra, she addresses Yuddhishthira, O best of men, Manusya Indra, O best of men, all of you do not deserve this miserable situation. Na upashamyati me manaha, my mind, na upashamyati. It cannot get quieted down. In simple American English, I can't stand it, is what she's saying. I can't stand it that all of you who deserve to be living a comfortable life in the palace, you don't deserve the misery of living in the forest. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. Why? Again, is it the situation or is it her conclusion? Her conclusion, her false expectation, this shouldn't happen to us. What a common thing. When people say, why me? We've had this discussion here several times, right? Why me? When something bad happens, that's one of the most common responses. Why me? You can imagine Draupadi feeling exactly the same. Why me? Why did this happen to us? We are a good family. We're a pious family. We're a dharmic family. Why did this happen to us? Tell me, do bad things ever happen to good people? All the time. Why? We call it karma. Due to karma, bad things happen to good people. So, if something bad happens to me, and if I say, why me? Aren't I being kind of willfully ignorant to the fact that I also have karma? Everyone else has karma, which makes them vulnerable to bad things in life. Do I not also have karma? Sure. Then am I not also vulnerable due to karma to having bad things happen to me in life? Of course I am. So when we ask, why me? There's a problem with that statement. And the problem is, and let me just put it out there very plainly. Why me suggests it's okay if bad things happen to other people, but it's not acceptable if bad things happen to me. That is arrogant. I am a normal human being like anyone else. Every other person is born with karma. That karma guarantees that we will all undergo suffering that we don't deserve. She's been complaining again and again. Adukhkarhan. Adukhkarha. Arha. Deserving. Dukkha of pain unnegates it. Not deserving of suffering, undeserving of suffering. She's used that expression in the prior class as well. She says, we don't deserve it, we don't deserve it. Fine. That's how karma works, right? Karma means you undergo suffering you don't deserve based on your actions in this life. But this is not the only life. We all certainly have committed mistakes in prior lives which caused us to accumulate papa karma. So we may not deserve it based on our life in this. We may not deserve it based on our actions in this life. But if we take the big picture, we can't deny that we are all subject to suffering due to karma. By the way, it works both ways. So bad things can happen to good people, and good things can happen to people who aren't so good. I think about the winners of that huge lottery. But I'm sure they're good people. But tell me, as good as they are, do they deserve $300 million? What did they do in their life? What did they do in this life to deserve $300 million? We cannot explain it like that. We must reach back using our doctrine of karma and recognize that they must have been born with some unusually good punya karma to have that lottery work in their favor. So, instead of saying, why me? Our response should be, why not me? I'm no different than anyone else. Like everyone else is subject to suffering that they don't deserve, I also am subject to suffering that I don't deserve. With that proper understanding, what happens to anger goes away. All right, next. Bhimasenam hi karmani, Bhimasenam hi Swayam kurvanam achyuta, Swayam kurvanam Sukarham dukitam drishtva, Sukarham dukitam Kasman manyurna vardhate, Kasman. So she looks at Bhima. Bhima, who is busy, I suppose, digging in the ground for edible roots. And she says, Bhimasena hi karmani swayam kurvanam. Swayam kurvanam. Engaged in karmani, engaged in this work being done Bhimasena, by Bhima. Bhimasenam swayam. Bhima himself, kurvanam, engaged, karmani, in this work, digging for roots. Achyuta, she addresses Yuddhishthira, oh, undefeatable, in undefeated person, Achyuta. He says that Bhimasena is sukha arham. Here's that word arha again, deserving. He is sukha arham. He deserves happiness. Again, ignoring the doctrine of karma. He deserves happiness. Dukitam drishtva. She's addressing Yuddhishthira right now. O Yuddhishthira, when you see drishtva, having seen Bhima, who is dukitam, having seen Bhima suffering, she says, kasmat, why? Manyuhu navardhate. Why don't you get angry? Seeing your dear little brother, not little, he's not little, he's younger, he's big, but he is a younger brother. So seeing your younger brother, Bhima, digging in the ground for roots, getting all full of this mud and filth, don't you get angry? Now, again, you could say, naturally she feels that way, but natural is not desirable. So look what's going on. It's the same problem with expectations. First she expects that her family shouldn't have to undergo that suffering. Why? It's a pious, dharmic family. Her expectation is they should be somehow excluded from the doctrine of karma. Bad things can happen to other people, other families, but bad things should never happen to her family. One wrong conclusion. Some of you remember in the prior class she had another wrong conclusion about Duryodhana. Do you remember that? The chapter opened with her. She felt that Duryodhana should feel guilty about exiling them to the forest. The chapter opened with her complaining that Duryodhana sent us to the forest, exiled us to the forest. He didn't say a thing. He didn't express any remorse over what has happened. So one expectation is that her family should be exempt from the law of karma and should be free of any kind of undeserved suffering, is one false expectation. Another false expectation is that Duryodhana should feel guilty, remorseful for what he did. What a ridiculous expectation. One more expectation is that her husband Yuddhishthira should feel angry. She's angry because Yuddhishthira is not angry. You get it, right? Why don't you feel angry? I'm angry. Why don't you feel angry? Pretty common, right? All right. People feel what they feel. When a 2-year-old gets angry, you understand 2-year-olds get angry. It happens. You don't say you shouldn't feel angry. You don't say that to a 2-year-old. You understand that anger is natural. How about this? And what we're going to see, especially in the next chapter, it is Yuddhishthira's nature not to get angry. But Draupadi feels that Yuddhishthira should be angry. And that is a false expectation, and that false expectation is adding to her anger. So now she's got 3 false expectations going to make her angry. What? 1, this shouldn't happen to us. 2, Duryodhana should feel bad about what he did. And 3, Yuddhishthira should feel as angry as I do. So with all these false expectations going, Draupadi is extremely angry, and she continues. Drishtva vanagatam partam, drishtva vanagatam, aduhkarham sukochitam, aduhkarham suk, nachate vartate manyus, nachate vartate. Tena muhyami bharata, tena muhyami bharata. So she's making the rounds. First she talks about Yuddhishthira stinking with mud. Then she talks about Bhima, who has to dig in the ground for roots. Now she turns to Arjuna, Partha. And she says, Drishtva, having seen, Partam, here it means Arjuna, who is Vanagatam, here in this forest. Having seen Arjuna in this forest, Arjuna is also digging for roots and stained in mud like everyone else. And she says that Arjuna aduhkarham. She's used that same word several times. He doesn't deserve to suffer like this. No one deserves. Who deserves to suffer? No one deserves to suffer. It's not a matter of deserving or not. It's a matter of karma. We understand that. No one deserves to suffer. Due to karma, we suffer. So, Arjuna is aduhkarham. Arjuna doesn't deserve suffering. Sukha uchitam. In fact, for Arjuna, he deserves to be happy and not suffering. But te, for you, Yuddhishthira, navardate manyuhu. Your anger does not rise up. So she's back to that. When you see Bhima digging in the mud, you see Arjuna digging in the mud, and yet you don't feel angry, Yuddhishthira. She says, Tena muhyami Bharata. Bharata, O great one of India, O Yuddhishthira. Tena muhyami. In loose American English, this drives me crazy. Muhyami, I am overcome, Tena, by this. I'm overcome by anger, and you don't feel any angry at all? What? And she's leading up to it. What's wrong with you, Yuddhishthira, for not being angry? So she's angry because Yuddhishthira is not angry. Got it. And now she gets a little sarcastic. By the way, she's angry because Yuddhishthira is not angry. This is something that often happens. When we're suffering, we want people not only to empathize with us, sometimes we want people to feel the same thing we do. Like, if I am angry, you should also feel angry. Is that mature? To expect others to share our emotions? I thought we're all individual human beings, different people with different orientations, different lives, different karmas. To expect, let's just make a general principle out of it. If you expect anyone to feel in a certain way, You're the foolish one. To have such an expectation, you should feel like this, you shouldn't feel like that. It's foolish and it's not helpful. Especially when you say you shouldn't feel like that. This has happened to you all. You're really sad, and somebody sees you crying or feeling sad, and they say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel sad. You've been told that." Does that help you at all? When somebody says you shouldn't, your sadness is a fact. It's an already existent fact. When somebody says you shouldn't feel sad, that person is expressing their expectation of you, which is a false expectation, which is foolish on their part, and possibly hurtful to you. Because if you're sad and somebody says, "Oh, you shouldn't feel sad," it's like they are expressing a judgment. What's wrong with you? Why are you sad? It's not helpful at all. So to expect anyone to feel in a certain way is just utter foolishness on our part. People feel what they feel for thousands of reasons we'll never know. Right? How can we know why a person feels? How can we know? Sometimes we don't know why we feel what we feel. If our own emotions are hard for us to understand, how ridiculous is it to imagine that we could understand the origins of somebody else's feelings? Emotions are so complicated. People feel what they feel. To expect them to feel otherwise is just naive on our parts. But that's exactly what Draupadi's problem is. She expects Yuddhishthira to feel angry. And she continues now with some sarcasm. Nunam chatata. Nunam chatavadnaivasti, nunam chatavadnaiva, manyur bharata sattama, manyur bharata, yatte bhratranscha bham chaiva, yatte bhratranscha bham, drishtva na vyatate manaha, drishtva na vyatate. Nunam. This is where the sarcasm comes in. Certainly, tava na eva asti manyuhu. Certainly, you wouldn't feel angry. Bharata Sattama, O greatest of this land, O Yuddhishthira, certainly you won't feel any anger. Yet, because of which having seen, te bhratran mamcha drishtva, having seen, bhratran, your brothers, your four brothers, mamcha, and me, seeing your brothers and me suffering, na vyatate manaha, your mind would certainly not be disturbed. You are this, you can... trying to think how to convey the Sanskrit, and the sarcasm is in that word nunam, certainly. And I'll paraphrase to give you the sarcasm. Certainly, Yuddhishthira, you are the great saint. And being such a saintly person, how could you ever experience this anger and misery that common people like us are experiencing? This is kind of like the message she wants to convey. She says, and sarcastically, it's like you imagine, the implied meaning is you imagine yourself to be above all this, but you're no better than us. You're the same as all of us, which, by the way, is not true. As we're going to see in the next chapter, Yuddhishthira has a great amount of wisdom with him that gives him the resiliency to be in this miserable situation without getting angry. We'll see that in just a few more verses. But Draupadi doesn't appreciate Yuddhishthira's maturity and wisdom, which is why she's very sarcastic towards him. And she, not quite, we've got just a couple more verses left here of her complaint. Yo na darshayate tejaha, yo na darshayate kshatriya kalahagate, kshatriya kal sarva bhutani tam partha, sarva bhutani tam partha, sada paribhavantyuta, sada paribhavantyuta. Yaha, and connected with the next line, kshatriyaha. Any kshatriya who na darshayate, doesn't display tejas, his strength, his might, his glory. Kale agate, kale, that a dropped due to grammar rules. Kale agate, when the time is ripe, when the time comes. A kshatriya who does not display his might, his vigor, his strength and power. What about that person? Tam partha, partha, O Yuddhishthira, tam, that person, sarva bhutani, all people, sada paribhavanti uta. All persons will revile him. A kshatriya who fails to display his strength and glory when the time is ripe, kale agate, when the time calls for that kshatriya to stand up with his might and power and glory and defend himself. But if that kshatriya fails to do so when the time is ripe, everyone will revile that kshatriya. Interesting argument. What makes it interesting is it's neither, you can't say it's all the way right and it's all the way wrong. There are certainly some people who will revile the kshatriya that doesn't stand up for himself, but there are other people who will praise that kshatriya for his self-control. This is a problem of other people's opinion. Look at Draupadi's argument. What will other people say? Oh, Yuddhishthira, you're not angry. You're not standing up for yourself. You're not fighting back. What will other people say? Well, it depends on who they are. Some people will say this. Some people will say something else. So one thing we forget, during Gandhiji's time, many people considered him a great saint. A lot of people reviled him. Let's not forget, he had plenty of detractors. After all, he was assassinated. He wasn't assassinated because he was loved by everyone. He wasn't. So a great man like Gandhiji, who was respected and loved and honored and revered by so many, there were maybe an equal number of people who had a terrible opinion of him for being weak, for being passive, and for maybe being, what would the expression be, a lackey to the British? So, a great person like Gandhiji was subject to being revered by some and reviled by some. What is it that made Gandhi so great is he ignored both groups. If he was revered, he ignored it. If he was reviled, he ignored it. He did what he considered was the right thing to do, which is what a great person does. An ordinary person is easily swayed by the opinions of others. Correct? An ordinary person is easily swayed by the opinions of others. So if you get this opinion, then you do that. If you get the other opinion, you do the other thing. I think of women who are sometimes wanting to have a certain kind of dress. And they'll ask one person, how do you like my dress? And she'll say, it's good, but if you did this, it would be better. So she does that. And then she'll ask somebody else, what do you think about my dress? And the other person will give her different advice. And then she'll do the other thing. Come on. How can we live our lives depending on the opinions of others, knowing that everyone's going to have their own opinions, and opinions are just that. They're just opinions. What should we be guided by? The opinions of others or by Dharma? Obvious, right? So Gandhi was not guided. Gandhi was not in some kind of popularity program trying to be the greatest saint of India. He would have behaved very differently if he just wanted to be popular. He did many unpopular things, drove everyone crazy, and even created a lot of enemies for him. He was driven not by the opinions of others, he was driven by his own sense of dharma, what is the right thing to be done. Yuddhishthira, in the same way, is not trying to be in a popularity contest. He doesn't care what other people think in a healthy way. That is to say, he is not going to be swayed by the opinions of others. He is going to do what is right. So Draupadi's argument is that Yuddhishthira, you are a mighty kshatriya, and here you're not even getting angry. What to speak of rising up in resistance, what will other people think? And, of course, Yuddhishthira doesn't reply until the next chapter. If he were to reply right now, his reply would be, who cares what other people think as long as I'm doing the right thing? That's the point. Okay. Then, I think this is her, her complaints finally come to an end. Draupadi concludes here. Tatvaya na kshama karya, tatvaya na kshama shatrun pratikatan tejasaiva hite shakya, tejasaiva hite shak, nihantum natra samshayaha, nihantum natra tat tvaya. Tat here means tasmat, therefore. Therefore, Yuddhishthira, na kshama karya. Kshama, forgiveness. Forgiveness, na karya, should never be given. Shatrun prati, to your enemies. Katanchana, in any way whatsoever, you should never forgive your enemies. Guess what word was going to figure prominently in Yudhishthira's response? Kshama. Forgiveness. And we'll see that in just a few minutes. We'll get to that. So she says, na kshama karya. You should never forgive shatrun prati, your enemies. Katanchana, in any way whatsoever. What should you do? Tejasa eva shakya nihantum. Tejasa, with your might, with your power. Tejasa, with your might. Te shakya nehantum, you are able to kill your enemies. Instead of forgiveness, she says we should take revenge. Look at the opposite perspective. So Yuddhishthira, we'll see that Yuddhishthira feels forgiveness in a sense of understanding. Wait a minute, we'll get to Yudhishthira's response in just a moment. But he certainly is not inclined towards revenge as Draupadi is. She says, na atra samshayaha, without doubt, you are capable of killing your enemies. So the message then is, O Yudhishthira, you should not forgive your enemies. You should seek revenge. And this is how Draupadi concludes her like an argument with Yuddhishthira. Usually arguments are more back and forth. But in the Mahabharata, it has a literary style. And in this literary style, you don't speak one sentence. You speak a chapter. That's how the Mahabharata gets to be some 86,000 verses long, because everyone is really long-winded. If you have a complaint, here Draupadi has a complaint. Is she going to utter her complaint in one or two sentences? No, she takes an entire chapter. Now, we're going to skip ahead. We're going to skip one chapter and then get to Yuddhishthira's response, which comes in the following chapter, and his response too is an entire chapter, his response to Draupadi. Yuddhishthira vacha, Krodha mulo vinasho hi, Krodha mulo vinasho, Prajanamiha drishyate, Prajanami Tatkatam madrisha krodham, Tatkatam madrisha kro, Utsrajed lokanashanam, Utsrajed lokanashanam. So he begins with just almost like a sutra. Sutra is a style of writing where with very, very few words, with minimum words, you give the big picture. And so with 2 words, he gives a big picture. Krodha mulaha vinashaha. Vinasha, destruction. Destruction is krodha mula. Destruction has its roots in anger. His literal statement, destruction has its roots in anger. What is the sense of it? If you are in a miserable situation and you respond with blind anger, your miserable situation will get far worse. Anger is an unhelpful response in any situation. Now, please don't misunderstand. So, the whole chapter, Yuddhishthira is going to argue against anger and in favor of forgiveness. That's the message of the whole chapter. But please don't misunderstand. Absence of anger does not mean passivity. Yuddhishthira is not arguing for passivity here. What he is saying is that whatever you do, if you do it with anger, you're only going to make the situation worse. Go back to the metaphor I gave, standing in queue. If you get angry and irritated, how does that help the situation? And if you express your anger and irritation to other people in queue, that doesn't help. If you're like in a store, there's some checkout person, if you express your anger and irritation to the checkout person, you've made a bad situation worse. Anger is one of your enemies. Shad Adi, these 6 enemies, Shad Ripu, they're also called, these 6 enemies within us, Krodha is one of those 6 enemies. Enemies in that they work against us. They lead us to engage in self-defeating behavior. If you have a difficult, complicated situation to handle, and if you're angry, how will that anger help? Not only will it not help, it can actually lead you to make a mistake. A very practical example. Suppose your boss does something and it drives you crazy. You get so angry. Why did he do that? So you've got an issue to deal with. So you go to your boss's office. If you go to your boss's office seething with anger, how is that going to go over? Now, you have a legitimate reason to go talk to your boss, but if you do so, seething with anger, that anger is going to work against you. That's how it's an enemy. one of the 6 traditional enemies, Shad-adi. So, that's exactly what he says here. Vinashaha, destruction, self-destruction. We could paraphrase it as self-defeating behavior. Vinasha. Vinasha means destruction. We'll paraphrase it here as self-defeating behavior is krodha mulaha, has its roots in anger. Anger culminates in self-defeating behavior. Some of you are thinking, Swamiji, isn't there such a thing as righteous anger? What good does it do? So you hear about the latest incident of terrorism, and you get angry, and you say, it's righteous anger. Look what those terrorists are doing. Tell me, your anger accomplishes what? Tell me, how does your anger hurt that ISIS or Taliban or whoever is the latest terrorist? Your anger does nothing to them. On the other hand, who's ever around you is kind of bearing the brunt of your anger and irritation. And if anyone's really being hurt by the anger, you are. What's happening to your blood pressure? This idea of righteous anger is silly. Yes, you should respond to injustice. But the point here is, if there has been some injustice, if you respond seething with anger, that anger isn't going to make you more effective, it's going to harm your ability to respond. This idea of righteous anger is really misunderstood. Anger is your enemy. All right. So he begins. Krodha mulaha vinashaha. Vinasha, destruction. We're paraphrasing here as self-defeating behavior. Is krodha mula, has its roots in krodha, anger. Prajanam, for all people. Drishyate, this is seen. Iha, here in the world, we can see for all people, anger leads. Anger is self-defeating. Basically. Well, and one more reason anger is self-defeating. Anger is often part of a whole package of emotions that takes place when we're a little out of control. Usually when we're really angry, isn't that an expression of our inability to control our behavior, control our speech? We're going to see that. I'm going to hold off on that point because it's going to come in a couple more verses. We'll come back to that one. That lack of control, we'll come back to it. So here he says, we see in all people that their anger is self-defeating. I'm paraphrasing the first 2 lines. Tat katam madrasha krodham utsrajet. So, tat, therefore, katam, how, madrashaha, for someone like me, how, krodham utsrajet, how could I indulge, utsrajet, how could I be involved in that anger which is lokanashanam, which is harmful to people, self-defeating. Knowing that anger is self-defeating, how could I indulge in that anger? Again, we're not saying to be, he's not saying, Yuddhishthira is not saying to be passive, but rather to fulfill your dharma without feeling angry. That's the bottom line. Anger is going to make you less effective, not more effective. And he continues to explain. Now we get into the out of control part. Kruddha papam nara kuryat. Kruddha papam nara kuryat. Kruddho hanyad gurun api. Kruddho hanyad gurun. Kruddha parushayha vacha. Kruddha parushayha va. Shreyasopyava manyate. Shreyasopyava manyate. Kruddhaha, a person who is angry, an angered person. Kruddhaha naraha, an angry person. Papam kuryat, commits sin. And this is the bottom line. Do you choose to get angry? Would anyone choose to get... I'm going to get angry now. This situation is so bad, I should be angry. It deserves angry. Ridiculous. No one chooses to be angry. Anger is an emotional reaction. An unchosen emotional reaction. Do you agree? No one chooses to get angry. We might choose to respond. No one chooses to be angry. Anger is an unchosen emotional response. Unchosen means you didn't control it. Unchosen means uncontrolled. An uncontrolled emotional response. Now, that anger first occurs in your mind. So step one is your mind is out of control. What is step two? What is connected to your mind? This one. When your mind is out of control, what happens to your tongue, so to speak? When your mind is out of control, overcome by anger, that's when we start to say the wrong things. And then what is the third thing connected? So mind, speech, and behavior. Manas, vak, kaya. These three aspects of who we are. Mind, speech, and behavior. When the mind is controlled, your speech is controlled, your behavior is controlled, correct? But when you are caught up in an emotional reaction, the emotional reaction has made your mind out of control with that unchosen anger, and then as a consequence, what happens to your words? Uncontrolled. You say things which are wrong, and not only that, but your behavior also can go out of control. And that's what he says here. He says, Krudha naraha, for an angered person, papam kuryat. They might commit a sin. Knowing it is a sin, knowing it is dharma, having a value for dharma, even though you have a value for dharma, let's be very specific, you have a value for not using harsh words. But when you get sufficiently angry, what comes out of your mouth? Harsh words. You have a value for not uttering harsh words. You have a value for dharma. But when your mind is out of control, what happens to your speech? Out of control. And you won't have this problem, but some people will get so angry they will watch out. They can hit you. Hopefully they don't have a weapon. And that's what he says here. Krudha papam, krudha naraha. An angry person, papam kuryat, can commit a sin. Yuddhishthira really goes all out here. He says, krudha, an angry person, hanyat, might kill, might actually commit murder. Gurunapi, even his teachers he might kill. Remember, in his time and place and culture, no one was more revered than Guru. So that's why he says, an angered person might commit murder, might even kill their gurus. Krudhaha, an angered person, parushaya vacha, with harsh words. Vacha, with words. What kind of words? Parushaya. With harsh words, that angry person might do what? Avamanyate, might revile, might be disrespectful. To whom? Shreyasaha, to elders. So that angered person might, through vacha, through words, might be disrespectful to elders, and through the body might even commit murder, even kill one's teachers. These are the three levels: mind, speech, and body. First the mind goes out of control. If the mind is out of control, what is the next to go, as they say? The next that'll go out of control is speech. And once the mind and speech are out of control, what is the next thing that can go out of control? Body, meaning behavior. Yuddhishthira amplifies that in the next verse. Vachya vachye hi kupito, vachya vachye hi kupito, na prajanati karhichata, na prajanati karhicha, na karyamasti kruddhasya, na karyamasti krudd, na vachyam vidyate tata, na vachyam vidyate vachyam. Kupitaha, an angry person, na prajanati, does not understand karhichat at all. An angered person doesn't understand vachya and avachya. Vachya, what you should say. Avachya, what you shouldn't say. An angry person doesn't understand. Actually, it's a little bit figure of speech. An angry person understands what should and shouldn't be said, but they're out of control. So the angry person cannot speak according to their values. An angry person can no longer distinguish. That may be a better way of putting it. An angry person can no longer distinguish between what should and should not be said at that moment. In the moment of anger, an angry person cannot distinguish between vachya, what should be said, and avachya, what should not be said. And finally, he concludes, kruddhasya, for an angered person, na akaryam asti. There is nothing, the Sanskrit is so clear, it's hard to put it in good English. Akaryam is something you should never do. Na akaryam is a double negative. Remember a grammar teacher telling you don't use double negatives? They're used all the time in Sanskrit. Na akaryam asti. There is nothing that you should never do. There is nothing that you should never do. Means what? Do anything you want. There is nothing that you should never do. Means what? Do anything you want. Na avachyam. Again, same double negative. There is nothing you should never say. Notice the double negative. There is nothing you should never say. Which means what? Say anything you want. Kruddhasya, for an angry person, they might say anything. They might do anything. And now he concludes. Yuddhishthira concludes, tam krodham varjitam dhiraihi, tam krodham varjitam dhir, katam hasmad vidhascharet, katam asmad vidhascharet, etad Draupadi sandhaya, etad Draupadi name manyu pravardhate, name manyu pravardhate. Tam krodham, that kind of anger, varjitam, is to be avoided, dhiraihi, by the wise. Wise people will avoid anger. Why? We just saw anger makes your mind out of control. When your mind is not controlled, your speech is not controlled. When your mind and speech is not controlled, then your behavior becomes uncontrolled. When your mind, speech, and behavior is out of control, watch out. What terrible mistakes any one of us can commit if our mind, speech, and behavior is out of control. Therefore, dhiraihi, the wise ones, for the wise ones, krodham varjitam, krodha is always avoided by the wise. That being so, katam, he addresses Draupadi, so, katam, how, Asmad vidhaha, how could someone like me, charet krodham, how could someone like me get angry? So here, Yuddhishthira says, I'm one of those wise ones. I have that wisdom. He's not out of pride. He's not being prideful or anything here. But Yuddhishthira definitely counts himself amongst the wise. He says, wise ones don't yield to anger. I also am not going to yield to anger. Draupadi, etad sandhaya, understanding this, Draupadi, na me manyuhu pravardhate, may, for me, manyuhu, anger, na pravardhate, anger doesn't arise in me. Yuddhishthira has conquered that enemy. The enemy of anger within, Yuddhishthira has already conquered. Therefore, he says, the wise will not yield to anger. I will not yield to anger. Doesn't mean he's going to be passive. He's going to follow Dharma. And we'll conclude here. What is Dharma for Yuddhishthira right now? Well, Yuddhishthira agreed to the terms of several dice games. As a result of the terms of those dice games, for Yuddhishthira, Dharma is 12 years in the forest. So if Yuddhishthira is going to follow Dharma, for him, following Dharma is to be in a forest for 12 years. Tell me, living in a forest for 12 years, is anger going to help him in any way? Call it righteous anger. How will that help him? It's only an enemy to anything you want to do in life. Anger will be an enemy. Anger is self-defeating. He has said such. Now he's going to continue. We'll see in the next class. He's going to talk about the antidote to anger. And the antidote to anger is forgiveness. But how to forgive, this is an important topic we'll get into in our next class. All right. Some announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our program for children at 11 o'clock. At 5 o'clock p.m. tomorrow is our mindful awareness meditation session. At 6:15, I'll conduct a satsang question-answer session tomorrow, Sunday. Library will be open after class. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.